Hi, today we're going to talk about long exposure, how to shoot amazing, gorgeous photos using Fujifilm cameras, and you can skip ahead if you want to go to the 5 things that I advise not to do when shooting long exposure, but otherwise you can stick around and you will see the behind the scenes, you will see what I use, how I use, what my gear is, and how to do all that. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is location. So you want to scout a place that is nice, where you have a river, a waterfall, clouds, anything that is in movement. That's basically the essence of long exposure. You want to have something that is moving, that gives some movement to the photo. And that is what gives that amazing look to long exposure and the beauty of it. Then a little advice here, take the necessary gear. That means make sure you take the right shoes that are preferably waterproof, make sure you take the right clothing, make sure you take everything you will need outside of the camera gear so that you can actually go on location and shoot. Very often you'll find yourself in water, you'll find yourself in the middle of a river or close to a river or close to some place that is wet, that is slippery. Once I actually fell down on my knees a couple months ago, both my knees, because I fell on a rock that was wet. So it is not without risks. So just think with that when you go out and shoot. All right, time of day. The time of day is important because if you take photos at the wrong time, you will have the wrong light. So you can take photos, say at golden hour, at blue hour, in the morning. Those are the times I prefer taking long exposure photos. You can also go in the afternoon, but I try to avoid and tend to not go during harsh sunlight. For example, in this photo that I shot at the beginning of the year, you can see this is a blue hour photograph and you can almost detect that there is mist, but that was actually a lake, so that is water. But I did a very long, I think it was 4 minutes exposure, and it gave me that soft mist-like. So it depends really what type of look you are going for, but really choose carefully the right time of day to go take photos. Okay, in terms of gear, this is what I use. First of all, I use Nisi for almost all my photographs. That's the gear that I like to use. And in there I have ND filters. There are different type of ND filters, but this is the one I use. There's different strength. The stronger the ND filter, the less light goes through, the more exposure, and the more your water is gonna look like silk. The circular polarizer, CPL, which is this guy here that I have in front of my lens. One cool thing about this is you can turn here like this and a little wheel, and the polarizing filter is going to spin 360 degrees and it will change the way it sees, it perceives the rays of light and cut some of them so you don't see them on your photo, and it will remove reflections on non-metallic surfaces such as leaves, water, and anything that will have a reflection of light on it. The cool thing about leaves is when you use this filter, you will pop more saturation out of them. You will see the green of the leaves, and that is cool. It's a natural way of getting more saturation out of your photos. Then I use a grad ND, so gradual ND filter. The purpose of this filter is, as you can see right here, to gradually decrease the amount of light that comes through the lens. That is great if you want to use it, for example, for skies. If you want to take a photo and the skies are a little bit too overexposed, you can put this, that way everything is exposed the same way. I'll tell you more about this in the section of the 5 things not to do when you're shooting long exposure. One key element is the tripod. I personally use this Peak Design carbon fiber tripod that goes with me everywhere. I will make a video in English. I didn't do it, I did it on my French channel, but I will make a video about this tripod, which is so far my favorite. But any tripod will do, just make sure that it is stable enough to keep all your gear straight, and I will hold it in place and not fall. You need a camera that can do manual mode, so in my case I use Fujifilm. In terms of lens, I use the 10-24 f4 first generation. You can use the second generation as well if you want to, but it's pretty much the same difference in terms of optics. I open wide usually at 10mm, which gives me a wide angle look. You can obviously zoom if you want to. I did it sometimes, but usually I open wide. And in terms of aperture, you want to open around f9 to make sure that you have everything in focus and that you don't lose too much light by closing your aperture too much. Last but not least, you need to make sure you have a cleaning kit. I use this, and I have another little Nisi cleaning brush that I use on my CPL usually and on my square filters. That way you make sure you have no dust or no particles that go in between that can make your photos look bad when you have sun rays that go into your lens. All right, in terms of settings, Let's go quickly through the settings. What I use is ISO 200 because it is the native ISO on Fuji cameras. I don't go at ISO 160 or even L, so it's 80. I usually keep it at 200, which gives a good ISO base. In terms of shutter speed, you put it on T, which is for time. Like I said before, I open an f9 in terms of aperture. One thing that I recommend to do is either having an external shutter that you can use to take the photo with a little cable or wirelessly, or even easier, you can put 2 seconds timer when you're taking your photo. That way, when you take the photo, it will give 2 seconds to stabilize fully and not have any shaking into the lens. One thing I do is I do turn on the preview mode so that you can see what is happening in real life and you can see that your photo looks good when you're changing the settings. Make sure you shoot in RAW. You can also shoot RAW and JPEG, but at least RAW. That way you can play a little bit more with your photos, you can edit them better, and you have more information to play with and to move around later on in post in case you're overexposed, underexposed, etc., etc. You can gain some more information back. All right, now let's get into the 5 things to avoid when you're shooting long exposure. This is based on my own experience. This is 5 points that I came up with and that over time I saw that it's better if you avoid to do, and here they are. Number 1, respect the source of light. That is very important because I see often photographs where, for example, the skyline is totally darked out, like it's completely dark, and the light of the photograph comes from the bottom, like the grass. That is somewhat wrong because as the viewer, you want to know where the light is coming from, and often the light comes from the skies. So if you have the skies in your photo, you can use a gradual filter, but make sure you don't put too much of it. That way you still show that the source of light is the skies. Point number 2, having a dirty lens when you're close to a waterfall. When you're getting very close to a waterfall, very often there's gonna be a little bit of wind. That wind is gonna push some very tiny, minute particles of water onto your filter or your lens, and even if you don't necessarily see them on the preview of your screen here, you will see them later in post, especially if there's some light coming back into the lens. So make sure when you go close to a waterfall, one thing I do is I set my camera, have everything ready, all the settings, and then when you're ready, what you do is you clean the front of your element, of the filter, and you shoot your photo right away. That way, you eliminate most of the water that would go onto your filter, and your photos are gonna look good. Point number 3, too strong an ND filter. So as we saw, there are different types of ND filters. There are stronger ones and less strong ones. What it does is the stronger the ND filter, the more stops of light you're losing, basically, and for which you need to compensate and for which you're gonna leave the shutter open longer. Now, if you use an ND filter that is too strong, like let's say you're in the evening, there's already little light, you're not gonna put something too strong because first of all, your water is gonna look completely flat and boring. You're not gonna have any movements in the water. You still wanna see some movements, that's important. So if you put something too strong, what's gonna happen is that you're gonna lose that movement, those waves in the photo. And the other reason is sometimes you just need to test. You need to try an ND3 and ND6 and try changing and try taking different photos with it and see the results. And then you can choose which one you prefer. One thing to keep in mind when you're using a CPL, a polarizing filter, is that the light that it cuts gets cut at 90 degrees from the sun. So one rule that I like to use, a rule of thumb, if you will, is to use your fingers like so. You point at the sun and you turn your thumb like this, and the direction of the thumb will tell you 90 degrees which direction you can take photos to cut the reflections. In other words, if you're taking a photo straight into the direction of the sun or behind you, when you have the sun in front of you, it will not cut the reflections, so the polarizing filter will be totally useless. What you need to do is you need to go at a 90-degree angle, and at that point you will be able to cut the reflections of the sun. So when you're taking your photo, think with that. Last but not least, point number 5, do not shoot with harsh light. I said at the beginning of this video, but that's very important. Choose a time of day when the sun is low and make sure that the light is not too harsh. It will give you better results in terms of shadows, in terms of highlights, in terms of contrast, in terms of dynamic range. It is just better to do that way. All right, so that was the 5 things to avoid when you're shooting outdoor and you want to take long exposure photographs using the Fujifilm system. What do you think? Do you guys shoot long exposure? Were those points correct? Would you add any points to my selection? Let me know in the comment section below, and I see you like always in my next video. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye.